you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. All right, hello everybody. Hello, this is Michael Voss. I'm here with you, your host of the No Soundbites Allowed podcast, and just working with my little technology. Oh, we're coming across. Hang on one second. There it goes. All right. Sometimes technology is a little weird and it goes into mono, and even though it shouldn't, it should be in stereo. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Excuse me. And as always, the Dragon of the Southern Tier is happy to be here with you. Excuse me. To be live and with everybody, talking about the issues of the day and a couple of interesting subjects. I think everyone will have some fun with this. I always enjoy doing it because I appreciate you. That's right. I thank you. I appreciate everybody who listens in, whether you're doing it live or if you come in afterwards. No matter when it is, I appreciate the fact that you take the time out of the day to join me, to watch this, to be involved, to ask questions, and to talk about the issues that really matter to all of us. Not the sound bites, not the TV commercials, not the campaign promises that never wind up happening. And we're going to go into that. But really talking about the things that actually matter, that matter to you, that matter to me. And so we're going to have some fun with that. And I hope everyone is doing well on this Saturday. Hopefully the snow wasn't too crazy, because I know in the Binghamton, Broome County region, we saw about 186 accidents because of this snowstorm, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we live in upstate New York. It's not like there's never snow. It's not like people don't know how to drive in the snow. But 186 accidents in one day, that's just ridiculous. It was horrendous. So I do hope that this is coming out and finding everyone being well and doing okay. And that's the first and foremost thing. I hope everyone's all right. Obviously, as you can see, I'm into the no shave November at the moment. I'm letting it grow, and it's a lot more gray than I thought it was. So I noticed that yesterday when I was doing my podcast, which you may have seen already. It's on YouTube. And just to let everyone know, because of the election, I'm actually behind on several episodes and uploading them onto the podcast itself, which would be audio alone, at the vosspolitical.podbean.com, which you can go and check out. But it is on YouTube at this moment, the video, which will allow you to be able to see me as I do the podcast. And it includes everything that you'll be seeing here today. So those have been done. It's just getting it up on to the podcast itself so you can listen to it as you drive. You won't be able to see it, but you'll be able to hear everything. And I want to thank Robin Scoville Clark for joining us. She's one of the first that I can see, so I'm happy to have you here. Thank you, Robin. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm going to get right into it in a moment. There is something I'm doing a little bit different today than I've done in the past, and we're going to track it. As I say all the time, we are always growing and trying to try new things and to involve you more directly. And as you can see on the screen, on the scroll bar, we have a phone number, which is a phone number for you to call in to be able to speak with us and to have conversation with us. So hopefully everyone will enjoy that. I've not tested it out before, so it's new technology. It's a new thing. So I don't know if it's going to work or how well it's going to work. So bear with me on that. If you call in throughout the next hour and a half, and I do mean the next hour and a half, then we'll see if I can get you on, and you'll be live, and we'll be able to have a conversation, and everyone should be able to hear it, and I'll work that technology. So if there's a few bugs in it, bear with me, okay? It's all new, so there's always some trial and error in everything. But we're going to have a great episode. I think so. So that's covering some of the pleasantries. I do have an announcement that I do want to make. That is some breaking news there. Well, sort of breaking news. There it is. And we're going to use my favorite little soundbite here. Newsflash. Newsflash. I do like my sound effects. Don't have a lot of them, but the ones I do have, I do like. And that is to remind everyone that on Monday, November 19th, I will be speaking at the Vestal Public Library at 7 p.m. I am a guest of the Americans for the Restoring the Constitution. I will be speaking about the postmortem review of the 2018 midterm elections. What is the impact? What were some of the numbers? What we can look forward to in 2019? And just going over all of that. Everyone is invited. It is a free event that is at the Vestal Public Library in Vestal, New York, and starting at 7 o'clock, open to the public. I hope everyone comes on down. We'll have a great time. We'll have a great conversation. So I did want to mention that. Now, with that said, let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about today. And that is going to be kind of interesting, I think. Let me start off, first of all, the 2018 election. Since we're talking about it and I was bringing it up, I want to just go over that a little bit because, well, it was harsh. It wasn't a blue wave. It wasn't a tidal wave. It wasn't a red wave. It wasn't a wave at all. It was just basically almost a regular election. It was mostly based on President Trump. And we saw a huge number of students, and that is true. We did have a lot of students come out and vote based on a 2002 change in election law that allowed students and pretty much almost anyone to go anywhere within a state and to jump into the local elections and affect those numbers. And we saw about a 16% of all of the votes in the Broome County, New York 22nd district were affected by that, where we had these individuals who had nothing to do with the local community or the New York 22nd District or Broome County came out, they jumped into the vote, and they affected the outcome. And there was about an increase of about 27% overall from 2014 versus the 2018 election. And that was a big increase. I got to tell you, it was amazing. Surprised me. But that had a big influence. Now, it actually surprised me because when I was thinking about it, some people may know, I love anime. I don't know if everyone does. A lot of people may or may not know what it is. It's not really a cartoon. These are adult animated stories that are, well, they're in that animated cartoon format, but many of the stories are very dark or very deep or very emotional. In a lot of subjects, it's a lot of sci-fi, sci-fantasy. I'm a very big fan. I don't actually watch regular TV. I watch the news, I watch Game of Thrones, and I watch anime. So that just gives you a little insight about me. And so in between, during the last month or so, last couple of months, I was watching a couple of new episodes, the new season of some of the anime that came out in between working on the election. Not for any candidate or any party, but I was working with some groups and certain organizations separate of them in regards to aspects of the election, the midterm election. And I watched this one episode. It's called Goblin Slayer. A lot of people may not know what that is. It's a fantasy anime set in a D&D, Dungeons and Dragons kind of environment, very much with that as an influence. And it's about these characters and how they're interacting with each other, especially this one gentleman who's called the Goblin Slayer. Now, the first episode, let me warn everyone up front, big warning here about this. The first episode of Goblin Slayer, it is dark. It's a heavy episode. A lot of people will have problems with that because it is not a nice, friendly episode. There is no happy about that episode. It's got some very intense scenes, very violent, and they are not for kids at all. But that episode, and looking at that first episode of Goblin Slayer, anyone who's seen the anime will know about this. Even if you look it up on YouTube, it's highly censored on YouTube. But if you looked at any comments about the show, it's highly censored on YouTube. But you can find some information about it, and it's basically watching a group of D&D adventurers go out and get slaughtered because they were overconfident, because they weren't prepared, a lot of reasons. I was remembering, in looking at the results from the 2018 election, I kind of was reminded of that first episode of Goblin Slayer. And in fact, I did a podcast yesterday about it. And this gives you a kind of an idea of what that theme was. What you're looking at is that little guy losing his sword there is pretty much the Republican Party, especially in New York State. And the goblins around him, who are having a gleeful time massacring him and his friends, were Democrats, essentially. That was the analogy that I made out of it. And I go into reasons why I think there was that connection there, why we saw the swarm of Democrats come out, how they approached and influenced and overcame the Democrats, the Republicans in the race, and what the impact of that was. So it was a good episode, and you can probably see it. Now, the problem is, and I put this up, the title of it was, Were the 2018 Midterm Elections Goblin Slayer Episode 1 in Real Life? And it was out last night, and the fact is that I would love people to see it, talk about it, have their comments on it. I go into Maxine Waters. I talk a little bit about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the impact and some of the goals of 2019 that we see coming out of the Democratic Party. Went into a few different things and how it kind of followed that anime in a lot of ways, except YouTube is trying to censor it. It's like invisible right now. If it weren't for the fact that I owned that site, that YouTube channel, you wouldn't be able to find it because YouTube is out there censoring it. And that's the big thought there. It's not that I wrote, that I had a podcast and I'm talking about the similarities here. It's not because I stole any content that was for that program, that anime. I didn't use scenes. I had literally three still images of that anime. That's it. 3 still images. The one you just saw is one of them. This is from the anime itself. That's one of the still images. And for some reason, and I think it's because of the title, Goblin Slayer, YouTube has made the video invisible. I can't even see it on my own website. If it wasn't for the fact that on my YouTube channel, if I didn't actually create it, I wouldn't even know it existed, which is ridiculous. Okay? They're censoring it highly without looking into the content when I'm talking about politics, not the anime. And I understand the anime has a lot of questions. There's a lot of controversy about it. Fine. It's not about that controversy. It's not about that story in that sense. It's about politics. And yet YouTube, without any concern about what the actual content is decided that, well, it needs to be censored, even for me. And that tells you about where we're going as a nation. And I'm using that, and I want to go into that because that's what we're seeing going forward. We are being censored. I've seen it on Facebook. I've seen it on YouTube. I've watched how it's affected the algorithms on how my ranks have changed over the years. I've been doing this 12 years. Not necessarily in this format, but I've been doing political commentary for 12 years. I've been writing articles. I've been doing videos. Now, for the last couple of years, I've been doing podcasts. And I'm watching how the rankings have changed, even though content has remained the same. The sources have remained the same. The interviews with elected officials have remained the same. But yet, I'm seeing a difference in the way that Google and YouTube and Facebook are allowing that content to be seen. And now we have what's happening with Goblin Slayer, where it's invisible. It's not deleted. It's not completely censored yet. It's just hidden from the public. And we're seeing that a lot more. It's basically compelled speech through lack of option. Because you don't know you have a choice. You don't know that there's something there. And because you don't know that, you're denied it. And you're only given one choice. You don't have a choice to say, well, I want to hear about why Mike thinks this anime is similar to what happened in the 2018 elections. You don't get that choice because some program or algorithm over at YouTube says you don't get to have that because it doesn't fit the profile of what they want people to talk about. It doesn't fit the profile of the conversation they want people to have. And we see that on Facebook as well. Over 800 conservative sites and Republican sites, pages on Facebook were wiped out. I don't know how many times that I've watched Facebook as I'm trying to do this live stream. This is the 21st one I've done. And I don't know how many times I've watched Facebook drop the page, make it spotty, make it almost impossible for people to watch it live or to see it even afterwards because they just don't like the content. And that's sad. And they've removed 800 different sites, and I know dozens of other sites and pages that have problems with Facebook and YouTube and Google and even Twitter, which have all three have admitted that they have algorithms out there denying people the ability to hear what's going on, to hear comments, to hear an opposing viewpoint to the progressive viewpoint that they put out, that these organizations essentially in control of the internet have been putting out there. And that's terrifying. And I know a lot of Democrats love this and they want this. This is what SOPA and PIPA, Stop Internet Piracy, those laws where the government would have more control over what people were able to do on the internet and what kind of content they could receive or could be transmitted. That's a big deal. And I wrote articles about that. You can look it up. You can check out the PIPA, P-I-P-A. Just go to the Voss Political, type in P-I-P-A into search, and you'll be able to see the articles about this, talking about it. This is all part of that same theme, control. Control of what you're able to think, what you're able to learn about, what knowledge you're able to have, and thus controlling what kind of conclusions you can have. That's terrifying. That scares me. It upsets me. And it should upset everyone because it's not right. It's never right that we could have some organization control what we can do. And they claim it's free because the information is allowed to get out there, except it's buried. It's essentially, if they don't outright censor it, they bury it so that you don't know that you don't have access. And that's terrifying. By the way, I always like to check this, and I do want to check. I know I can hear this well. Is the sound coming across all right? Please, somebody give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you're able to hear everything as well as I think you should be able to. Because again, Facebook plays games. I've seen them where I think it's coming by 5x5 with great volume, and we're seeing on the other side with you guys watching this live, not so much. So that's always a concern of mine. So I'm talking about censorship here. Excuse me as I drink a sip of coffee here. But we're talking about censorship. We're talking about the direction the nation is going into, which is more and more compulsion. A compulsion, especially by lack of option, where you don't have a choice, or the choice is so hidden, so removed from the public eye and the ability of the general average person to be able to find that information, that it's the equivalent of not existing at all. And great effort has to be taken to try and overcome that by those who are trying to disseminate that information, like I am, like I have been. And I'm not going to stop just because Facebook or YouTube or Google or Twitter are giving me bad access. I'm still going to come out there, and I have been. And that's why I thank you guys for being involved. You make the difference and make it worthwhile, especially when you spread this and share this and let other people know. But that's a dangerous trend we're in. And we're seeing it's going to get a little bit worse because let's remember what happened recently. Jim Acosta. Jim Acosta got his credentials back to go back to the White House. Now, this is a First Amendment issue. And again, it's about compulsion. It's about what's absolutely required, what you can and cannot do. And I want to talk about that a little bit, but let's go into what we know for sure. CNN doesn't like President Trump. They never have, not since he started in the campaign for the presidency. They never found him to be a good candidate. Now, you can agree with that or not, that doesn't matter. That's really not the important thing here. It's that the media, the news media, the major news media, chose or decided that there was a candidate they didn't like, and therefore they emphasized every negative about this candidate in their coverage of him. This candidate still, given that they didn't like him, won. President Trump won the election. The fact that the news media didn't find him to be their type of president didn't matter. The public did. The news media then decided to punish both the president and the public for having elected a president they didn't approve of. And we've seen a landslide of negative news that has questionable sourcing or is absolutely incorrect, out of context, and constant attacks. Leading that charge, and has been for some time, is CNN, which has resulted in them having very negative ratings. CNN is led by, in this charge against President Trump, has been Jim Acosta. Now, I'm a member of the press. I understand how important it is to have access to politicians. I understand his frustration that he can have. I know that Anthony Brindisi, I've been after him, someone who I have done interviews with in the past, 2013, 2014, 2015. I have talked with him. I have done interviews with him. When he became a candidate for the 2018 New York 22nd Congressional District race, he suddenly decided he didn't want to speak to me anymore. And I spoke with him in person. 5 times? I've been to 30% of all of the events that he's had in the race where he was having public events, and I've been to 30% of them. I've talked to him 5, 6, 7 times during the last year and a half, where I've met him at various events and public activities, and I've actually spoken to him and said, let's do an interview. You've done interviews with me before in the past, let's do an interview again. And he said, I'm thinking about it, sure, we'll see how that works out. In other words, he said no and blew me off because he didn't want to answer the questions I had to ask. Even though I asked them on WTQ, I asked him on WNBF, I asked him on Twitter, I've asked him on Facebook, on my sites. I've asked several questions. But he didn't want to answer that, which is frustrating. But he is not obligated to do so. Yes, I'm a member of the press, but his answer is, well, I'm talking to other members of the press. The public is still able to get the answer, except no one's asking the questions I ask. Like in the Spectrum News debate, when Mr. Brindisi, I was one of the first people to point out that when Mr. Brindisi was asked a question, did he ever support single-payer health care? His answer was never. He told Liz Benjamin in the Spectrum News debate at Colgate that he never has supported single-payer health care. He instead supports the Democrat-quoted broken law of Obamacare. He believes in working with Obamacare, which is completely flawed, as Democrats have said since 2010. Except that's not true. He lied to the public because on July 20th of 2018 at Binghamton University, there is video, as noted by Real Clear Politics, that Anthony Brindisi actually did say and did promote single-payer health care. It is one of the issues he supports, by his own words, in video as announced by Real Clear Politics, which is considered a neutral site. And I was one of the first to highlight that. He didn't want to answer that question. He didn't want to answer that discrepancy. No one in the news media brought it up, and every time he spoke afterwards, didn't say, can you please explain why you lied to the public? So the public never got to find out about that, and they were denied. Now, I use that story to bring up the point that, again, here we are with Jim Acosta. So I understand his frustration, and I understand as a member of the press the need to be able to ask a tough question of candidates and elected officials and to get answers to those questions. I go through it all the time. So I understand that. And I can understand that he may have a personal viewpoint. That's fine. Now, the difference is he's a journalist. I am a political commentator. They're not the same. I am asking things and talking about things from a Republican conservative viewpoint. Mr. Acosta is supposed to be neutral, or at least as neutral as modern major media can be. He isn't. Not even close. He isn't asking questions. Mr. Acosta starts with, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you what this should be. Or he says, you misinterpret the law. These things can't be true because, and he lectures. He's having an argument. That's not the job of a journalist. It can be the job of a political commentator, and it definitely is something that individuals can do all day long. But that's not what the press is there for. The press is there to ask a question. When I have an interview with a candidate or an elected official, as I have with Democrats, Libertarians, Conservatives, and Republicans alike, I don't say, I think that you don't understand the law. No. I say, here is a question. When I asked Anthony Brindisi about his votes on red flag legislation, he disagreed with the understanding of it. Fine. That was his answer and never answered my question. That's the problem, but not the fact that we had a difference in understanding of what the legislation does. When I asked that same question of Donald Lapardo, the assemblywoman for the 123rd District of New York, I didn't say, so you're wrong for voting for this. I did say that I want to understand why, because I think, as I understand it, there are some problems with this. This is a flawed legislation. And the answer she gave was, it was a flawed legislation. That podcast, that interview is available to the public. I've had conversations with Jason Garnar. I've had conversations with Fred Akshar, challenging him about the Second Amendment and where he stands on that when he first got elected and since. So I can ask these questions. That's fine for a political commentator. And to add some of my views to that question, because obviously I'm not a journalist. I'm not completely neutral. That's known walking in. CNN is supposed to be. And when you're lecturing the president and bullying the president based on the fact that you have a press credential, doesn't make it right. That's not a First Amendment right. The press doesn't have the right to lecture to politicians, not when they're supposed to be asking a question. You have the pulpit, you have the media, you have gallons of ink. You can just go out there and write whatever you want. Just be honest with people and call it an editorial or a commentary and say whatever you want. That's what the freedom of the press is. People misunderstand that. They don't see that. What they see instead is that somehow the media has the right to say anything it wants. They don't. It's not an absolute. You can make any comment you want if you let people know it's a comment, but you don't get to just do whatever you want. You don't get to walk into the White House and just scream at the president until he answers whatever you want him to answer the way you want him to answer it. That's not how it's done. That's not a freedom that you have. So Jim Acosta got his press credentials pulled. Now, because he was rude, he was lecturing, and he was on a diatribe with the president. And the president said, okay, you don't get to have a press pass because You can't you have no decorum. Do you agree with that? Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, CNN didn't. And CNN went to the courts. And the courts agreed with him. Now, it should be mentioned, they were very specific. They got a Republican appointee. It was a Bush-era appointee who's more conservative-leaning judge who said, no, the First Amendment, you can't do this. Not necessarily so much because of the First Amendment, but because of due process, which I don't really think applies here in that context. Mr. Acosta he's there as a member of CNN. CNN, the company, was not denied the ability to speak to the president or to ask questions, nor were they denied the ability to write whatever they want about it. But what they were denied is to have that one individual have the ability to lecture at the president. There is a difference there. It's not subtle. There is a big difference. CNN could have had any one of their reporters apply for a press pass, get the press pass, and go and ask the president any question they would like. Jim Acosta is not allowed to go and lecture the president. That's a different thing. So, yes, I think it's important. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, and it's probably a little bit dry for a lot of people, but this affects the way the future is. And someone asked a really great question about this. And the question was, if we see that Acosta can go out there and he can go and lecture the president, not ask questions, but lecture the president from his own personal political viewpoint, and that is proven to be something that is protected by the First Amendment, then how in the world can Facebook, YouTube, Google, and all the other social media sources, Twitter, go around with algorithms that suppress political thought and or outright censor political thought? It's crazy to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I know I went the long way around about this, but I hope it makes it very clear, because we're seeing this. As I said, this is already happening just because I have the word Goblin Slayer in the title of a video about politics. The name, just the name of a anime is enough to censor and suppress my free speech. And that should trouble people. That should really trouble them. Because on one end, we're saying, the government and the laws and the courts are saying you can't suppress speech. But yet at the same time, we're watching institutions suppress speech. And that doesn't make any sense, especially from individuals who are members of the press. I am a recognized member of the press. I am a recognized political commentator. I may not be the biggest in the world. I may not be national, but still in all, I am. And yet the suppression is allowed against me, against other members of the press. We see this all the time. And some of them are loved, some of them are not. Various pundits, various political commentators, news organizations are constantly, when they're right-leaning, they get suppressed or outright censored. And yet, and we've seen this, Twitter admitted, the CEO of Twitter admitted 2 months ago that they had an algorithm where 600,000 Twitter users, including members of Congress, were suppressed. Members of Congress were not allowed to use Twitter, or were having their comments on Twitter, speaking to their constituents, suppressed. They were denying constituents the ability to hear from and communicate with their elected officials because Twitter doesn't like right-leaning voices. And YouTube doesn't like comments that don't meet their standard, that aren't left-leaning, being progressive and positive, and highlights what they think things should be like. That is terrifying. That's compulsion. That is compelled thought. Compelled speech, compelled thought. That's control against individuals without their knowledge and willingness. It's compelled because you don't get the option. You don't get the choice. You don't get to know. So when I see that Jim Acosta here has gotten the ability to go back into the White House, I'm conflicted. And I understand all the news media rallied around to say, yes, you cannot do this to him the way you did. Which technically, yeah, he should be able to. Because not everyone gets to go into the press. I'm a member of the press. I can't speak before President Trump. I would love to be able to go into the White House press pool and to be able to ask a question of President Trump. And the question I would ask of President Trump is about the red flag legislation, both on the state and national level, which is a very scary thing. And that's a different podcast I'm going to have shortly, talking about what's going on with the outright forcible taking away of guns, that there are now proposals to outright just take guns away and punish people for owning firearms as the Second Amendment allows, as state laws allow. They're just going to take them no matter what, and if you own it, they'll then punish you for it. That's a new legislation, surprisingly, from a Democrat out of California. And I'll go into that in a different podcast at a different time. But here's that problem. I can't go into that White House press pool and just start talking to the president and, or berate him because he hasn't commented on this yet, even though it's a national interest, a question about national interest. So where is that line? I don't see the news media, none of the local, I'll even go to the local level, none of the local news media rallied to my support to say, Anthony Brindisi, why wouldn't you answer a question from Michael Voss? Why are you afraid of doing an interview with this recognized member of the press that you have done interviews with in the past? Now, I should also put out a disclaimer here. Anthony Brindisi, when I spoke with him at Temple Reform in Binghamton, New York, did state that if he were to win the election, he plans to do several interviews with me. And so I've only had to wait 2 years for him to be able to do an interview with me again since he's run. But he did promise, take it, for what it is. He did promise that he would do interviews with me because he knows I'm a fair interview. And we'll see if he actually keeps his word on that. It's a campaign promise, essentially, I believe. And we'll see if he keeps his word and actually does an interview with me if he wins. The final count is not done, although it is leaning towards him by about 3,100 votes at this time. And if he wins, fantastic. He's another politician, and I'll interview him like I would, Assemblywoman Donald Pardo or County Executive Jason Garnar or any other politicians I've spoken to and interviewed, including himself, in the past. But we'll see. I don't know. But that still brings me back to this thought with Jim Acosta, and I know I keep circling around it. There are so many aspects of this that affect so many aspects of our lives. It's not simple. I wish that I could say this in a 30-second soundbite so that everyone would get it. It's just not possible because it doesn't work that way. I wish it did work that way, that it was so simple that we could just say, here's the answer. It's not. The answer is not as simple as, well, Jim Acosta went to the court and he got his press pass back. It's not. Because is he abusing his media credentials? I would say yes. Is he conflating information, saying the president didn't answer his question when he didn't ask a question? He made a statement. And the statement opposed the point of view of the president. And he's done that several times. And so he's lecturing at the press secretary or the president, and he's saying, well, they're not answering my question. You're not asking a question. You're making a statement. You're pontificating. You're promoting a specific political ideology as a commentary, not as a journalist. So there is a difference. And you're saying that if someone doesn't allow that pontification, that propaganda to exist and to continue because you want it to, that the courts must force them to allow you to do that. But those very same courts do not allow and do not require Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all forms of social media to also comply and allow freedom of speech. That terrifies me. That really concerns me. It makes me very upset because that's not the way it's supposed to be. And it's not a matter of whether or not we agree. It's that denial of thought, that denial of the freedom of thought and to make your own conclusions. It's not what the media is supposed to be doing. So, yes, the president shouldn't just arbitrarily remove members of the press. I thought President Obama was wrong when he was doing it to Fox News. I think President Trump was wrong in doing that to CNN. But I do agree that we're seeing an abuse from Jim Acosta under that First Amendment, and there's a balance somewhere in there that we should have a national discussion on that we're not. The discussion now has become personal. Do you like Jim Acosta or not? It doesn't matter if I like Jim Acosta or not. It doesn't matter if I like the way that he presents the news and whether or not he's being a journalist or a political commentator. That's really not, it's not that personal issue. I don't care about that personal issue. I care about the bigger issue of the First Amendment. Who's abusing it? At the moment, both sides are. Jim Acosta is abusing it and his rights as a member of the press to be able to pontificate and to propagandize. And we're seeing the president abuse the Fifth Amendment of due process by removing him without actual cause on charges that didn't really exist. Acosta didn't, he was claimed to have assaulted a woman. He didn't. He's rude and he was inappropriate, but that's not the same thing as an assault. So you can't blame him for those things. So it's kind of a catch-22 here. Nobody's right. Everyone's wrong. But who loses? The public. The public loses. Because basically the court has now said that it is perfectly legitimate in a press pool for a member of the press to pontificate, to propagandize the event, and that elected official has no choice but to allow that to happen. So theoretically, I should be able to have a conversation with any member of any Democrat, any libertarian, any conservative, even Republicans, and I can berate them for my personal opinion in an interview that is meant to be for the public, and I can berate them for an unlimited amount of time, apparently, and they have no choice but to stand there and just deal with it. That's what that means. That's what the consequence of that is. That we can have, not just to the president, because this is a precedent. It's a legal precedent. That's dangerous. That is dangerous. It is not what the First Amendment is meant for. That is not what the power of the press is meant to be able to do. And yet that is what it is becoming. Much to the cheers and joys of the far left, who are not realizing how this would be used against them as well. It would be used against everyone. Everyone. I would never get another interview, and according to this court case, I should, and I would be able to sue using this as a precedent, saying, you cannot deny me. I can go to Anthony Brindisi, to anybody in the press and go, hey, I'm a member of the press. You have to stand here and allow me to lecture you about a political ideal that I have that you don't share. And because I'm a member of the press, you don't get a choice in that. And if you don't allow me to do it, I will take you to court. The ramifications of that are horrendous. I would never do that. I have never done it. I never will do it. I think it's wrong. That's an abuse of power. And yet the courts are saying that's perfectly fine and that's okay. Now, I know I've been talking about that for a while here, but I think it's important. It's a very important issue, and it's something we really need to consider and really be aware of, because the ramifications are dangerous to us as a free nation, to us as a free-thinking nation. And it takes away our control of politics. And we've already seen, like we saw in the 2018 elections, we saw individuals who were going out and they were targeted. And I went into that in my Goblin Slayer analogy in the podcast yesterday, that this is dangerous. We're seeing people targeted to vote specifically, without any reason, without any cause, without any knowledge of what they're voting for or what the consequences of that is about, that they're going to go and vote a certain way because that's what the commercial told them, because that's what the social media told them to do, and they think it's right. And they're voting for things that they don't even agree with, the consequences that they would not support. That's really, really scary. That's really scary. And I think we really need to have a conversation about that as a nation and to really understand it. Yes, CNN absolutely should have the ability to have a representative speaking for their news organization, asking questions of the president, and the president absolutely should be questioned. I don't care what president it is. Just like with President Obama and Fox. Yes, Fox News should be allowed to be at every press event, and yes, Fox News should ask questions of the president, and yes, the president should answer their questions about the issues of the day, not the political pontification, not the political lecturing. No, that's not what the format is for. And if they want to do that, they have all the ability to have commentary all day long in their news media organizations, just as I do. But that doesn't mean that they have a right to be able to do that. And the president doesn't get to say willy-nilly that he doesn't want to have them in the press pool for no reason. That's wrong as well. So no one wins here. No one wins. And maybe I've gone on about that too long. I don't know. But I think it's a very important issue. But we're going to take a quick break. I just need to have a little more coffee, and I don't want to swallow, be drinking coffee while I try and have a conversation with you. So we'll be back in about 3 minutes. Just check out this quick video. right, everybody. Thank you. We're back. And I'm glad to have you back with me. Give me one second. There we go. And just trying to spread the word, making sure that everyone can hear and see what's going on. We did add a question to the podcast for everyone to check out, and that is, should news media be allowed to lecture elected officials? And that's an interesting question. Oh, wait a minute. There it goes. That's just the mono. The mics are acting up again. I apologize. But should news media be allowed to lecture elected officials? It's a yes or a no. Should they be able to propagandize and promote personal political views when they're supposedly handling neutral positions and neutral questions to elected officials? Because we're going to see more of this going forward. Guaranteed, we're going to see this more as we go forward. And it's going to be interesting to see how President Trump and the other elected officials, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, all of the elected officials, how are they going to react to this? Come on. We're having some problems with the... Sorry, there it goes. Having a little bit of a problem with some of the vocals here. So I apologize for that. But we will see this with a lot of politicians, with a lot of elected officials going forward on the right and the left. And how are they going to deal with that? How are we as a nation going to deal with that? It's going to affect all our lives. So I think it's an important question. But let's go into something that's a little bit different, a slightly different. Oh, come on. I apologize. This is really acting up today, and I don't know why. It's something probably with the feed. But anyway, we're going to struggle through until I can get this fixed. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is also about, I wanted to go into something a little more local, which is what's going on with Governor Andrew Cuomo and with what we see happening with Amazon, because it's crazy. This is one of the worst deals I've probably ever seen. And it's a deal that we're hearing a lot of people talk about. Okay. And essentially what's happened there is Governor Cuomo, some point during this election cycle of 2018, even as he's running for re-election, he made a deal along with Mayor de Blasio of New York City. They made a deal with Amazon. They didn't tell anyone about it. They didn't let anyone know that this was going on, that they were having a conversation. They made a very private deal and said, hey, we're going to guarantee a lot of money, billions of dollars, to Amazon to be able to have them make their second headquarters part of New York City. And that's a problem. That is a major problem. And a lot of people should be upset about that, because we have, at first glance, we have the governor of New York, who is acting behind the backs of his own party. Okay, it's not just that he's acting against the interests of Republicans or conservatives or libertarians. No, he's making a deal behind the backs of everyone in New York State. He's literally doing his own thing under the guise of the power of the governor, and that's very upsetting. I think it's upsetting. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think it is. The fact is that there's a lot of people who are upset about this, because they should be. Now, most people I notice, though, are upset about this for the wrong reason. They're upset. Well, I shouldn't say it's the wrong reason. For a bunch of reasons. They're upset because, well, we're going to have a lot of debt in New York State, which we can't afford. And they're upset because, to go back to this is an article, by the way, from Slate magazine, and they're pointing out the fact that pretty much every single deal that Governor Cuomo has made, telling us that New York State's going to do better off, hasn't worked. And they go into, things like there's the Buffalo Billions, did not work. Nano Center did not work. Created a movie studio, did not work. Pretty much everything. New York Rising did not work. There's basically no major economic deal. The drone testing site at Griffiths International Airport, Anthony Brindisi supported it. Representative Richard Hanna supported it. Governor Cuomo supported it. Has failed. $250 million, created 11 jobs. That's just ridiculous. So over and over and over again, we have seen how Governor Cuomo and his economic policies have completely failed the people of New York at every step, without question. And yet he makes this new deal on the same premise that he's made every other deal, that this is going to benefit everyone, that everyone's going to do okay, that we're going to have more money coming into the state, and everyone's going to we're going to get more taxes in, so that'll be able to lower the taxes for everyone in the state, which has never happened and never will happen. That there are going to be more jobs, and that therefore people are going to be able to have better lives and better quality of lives because they'll be able to have more money, except that never happens either. We're just seeing a loss all the way around. And people are upset about that debt. And Slate's worried about the fact that there's a history of failure. And those are all good things to be worried about. But that's not the main thing that we're seeing a lot of Democrats focus on. Instead, we're actually seeing things like with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the new representative for the New York 14th District. And she's upset. Ocasio-Cortez claims that New Yorkers are outraged over the opening of the new store. Now, this is true. A lot of people are outraged. But why? Well, in this news story, Ocasio-Cortez, representative or future representative Ocasio-Cortez, is outraged because she wants to know if this deal is going to allow there to be unions. Because everyone's worried about whether or not there are more unions in New York State. And she's worried about what's the minimum wage going to be for these workers, and what kind of jobs are these workers going to have. And she's worried about whether they're going to have the right health care benefits. Or are they going to have single payer? Or are they going to have Obamacare? What are they going to have? And that's her question. And that's the question from the far left. This is why the left is upset with Governor Cuomo on this secret backdoor deal that circumvents the state Senate, the state assembly, every single New Yorker, every representative in New York, at every level of government. That's what she's upset about, whether or not they're going to have unions. Really? Is that the big problem? Is that seriously the big problem here? Because I seriously have other questions, other issues that I think are far more important. By the way, I also want to mention Kevin. I thank you for joining us. Kevin Dyer joined in. I'm sorry if you joined a little while ago and I didn't notice. I apologize for that. And remember, folks, the phone number is coming across. If you want to call in or if you want to just type in a comment on Facebook, please go right ahead. I'm here for you. So go for it. But the thing that gets me about this deal, this Amazon deal, that a lot of politicians are touting as being great for New York. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to create jobs, as they always do. They always say it's going to create jobs. They always say it's going to lower taxes. They always say it's a wonderful deal that everyone should be happy about. And then they forget about it, and the consequences happen where we don't get any of those things. But, they expect that everyone's going to forget in 3 to 6 months, as they always do. Everyone forgot about Buffalo Billions until a bunch of people were arrested and now convicted for corruption. But no one remembered the Buffalo Billions and all the money that's been spent on that. No one remembers the drone testing site in Griffiths Airport because all the people there, they're making their money, and no one's gotten any real jobs. It hasn't done anything it's supposed to do. But no one's talking about it in the news media. There's no commercial about it, so no one pays attention to it, except political junkies like me and political commentators. Even news media forget about this because they're moved on to the next story. But the consequences are still $250 million of our tax money is gone. Your property taxes went up to pay for this, and you got nothing for it. So that's one of the concerns, but here's the other thing that makes me very concerned about this. Oh, God, this technology is just a pain in my butt today. Here's the thing that's really upsetting me about this, though, and especially when I listen to the new representative, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as she decides to say, this is a bad deal because it's not as progressive as she would like it to be. It's not as socialist as she would like it to be because it's a private business, and she's upset that a private business is coming into essentially her area, her plane of influence. Why isn't she asking the question, and this is an economics major. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a waitress and an economics, she has an economics degree. How those two things come together, I don't know. But be that as it may, she's not asking the question, does this have a chance of being successful? That should be one of the first questions she would ask. Will this be successful? Does it have a chance of working? That's an important question. How about another really good question that someone with an economics degree who's now a member of Congress or is about to be a member of Congress may want to ask about? As I mentioned, the state debt. Can New York State afford this? Can New York City afford this to give away $3 billion of taxpayer money? Could we use it? She makes a point very briefly in her comments saying, hey, the subway could use that money. Well, guess what? Upstate New York could use that money a lot. And we're not seeing it. Not for our roads, not for our bridges, not for how many small businesses could be helped out throughout all of upstate New York. How many farms could be helped in upstate New York with $3 billion that we somehow magically found? Not like we don't have more than enough debt. We have billions in debt. We have more debt than most nations have as a gross national product. New York State is, New York State is the top, 3 economies. New York City alone is in the top 5 economies of the world, I believe. Maybe the top 15. Don't quote me on that. But it's up there. It's more than 90% of all the nations in the world don't make as much money as New York City. And New York State makes more money than 90% of all the nations in the world. And yet we have more debt than probably 75% of all the nations in the world. And we suddenly found $3 billion out of nowhere to be able to give away, instead of using it to help promote some of the businesses that upstate needs, to improve the quality of life of those individuals who don't happen to be in a union. And since they're not in a union, well, Representative Ocasio-Cortez could care less because, they need to be in a union. They need to be socialized. Well, we're not, and we don't want to be. But does that mean we don't get support and we don't get to be represented? In the world of Representative Ocasio-Cortez, yes, you get nothing. You're not important to her, even if you're one of her constituents, which is kind of scary and sad. And why didn't she ask about, and here's a question that we're not hearing enough about, what about the abuse of power? Governor Cuomo straight up abused his power. He usurped every level of government, from the local, the state, everybody. The state senators that were in the region that should have had some voice on this, the New York City Council, the assembly members, even the members of Congress who, represent people in that area, like Ocasio-Cortez, who have some influence on that. Mayors, governor, nobody had a word except Mayor de Blasio, who was in on the deal, and Governor Cuomo. Two people get to make $1 billion decision that's going to affect 19 million people in one shape or another. Roughly about 7 million, 8 million people in the city of New York directly and immediately. And they get to make that choice. And they purposefully made sure no one else could have a voice. No one else was in the meeting, and they structured the deal so that no one else can do anything about it. Even if the state Senate, even if all the Democrats, even if everyone agreed with Ocasio-Cortez and decided that, there has to be a union, that they have to socialize Amazon and make it a democratic socialist, or in other words, communist organization, and they need to take it over. They couldn't do so even if they could get everyone in New York State. If you got all 19 million people in New York State to say, we hate this deal and we need to socialize Amazon, you can't. You can't, because the deal was done through the power of the governor behind everyone's backs, and guarantees that you can't even ask questions about Amazon without Amazon knowing about it, without Amazon being protected from the public and from questions by news media and the public. That's got to scare people. They are literally, the power of the government is protecting a business because of someone abusing the power of elected office, and no one's talking about it. That should be one of the first things and most important things we should talk about. This is one of the reasons why we should never have reelected Governor Cuomo, in my personal opinion, and many people. I mean, upstate New York did not vote for him. Why? Because he didn't have the best interest of most of the people in upstate New York. And this proves it. He doesn't have actually throughout all of New York. This isn't something that he's doing because he's trying to help New York State. He's trying to help himself. And I would want to keep an eye out to see whether or not Amazon and Jeff Bezos make any donations to Governor Cuomo as he goes on his trail for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. I really want to see whether or not they're going to make donations to his campaign and see if that has any influence. It's going to be scary. I would be very concerned about that, because that's very troubling. It's not just a little bit troubling, it's massively troubling that we're going to hear that we have this individual who's very much, his total ambition is to become president, and this is what we can expect from him, that he would abuse his power and to use his power of the executive of the New York State to be able to enact deals that he likes, regardless of whether anyone else thinks it's a good or bad idea, especially with his history of bad ideas, and he's going to usurp all of their power. I don't know. That terrifies me. I don't know. What do you guys think? Again, this is a conversation I'm having with everyone. And if no one's, and until you guys ask questions, I'm just going to keep on going. But you can call in. The number's on the screen, or you can type in a comment here on Facebook, and I'm actually even checking out my Twitter feed, which is MV Consult, and you can make a comment there as well, just to let people know I'm listening and I'm looking for your comments, because you make the difference here. You guys are what's important, and what you think is what I want to talk about. But I mean, these are some of the things that I think that are huge, and we're looking at. This is going to happen. We're already seeing the effects of the 2018 election, where politicians are just doing whatever they want. They are now using their power exactly the opposite way than they promised, saying that, hey, we are your servant. We're going to help you. We're going to do things in your best interest. And then they turn around and just do whatever it is they think is good for them. Kind of reminds me of something. What could that have been? What was that thing that kind of reminded me of this? It was something, let's call it the Matrix. Yeah. The agents, the power, the overwhelming oppressive force in the background that nobody gets to notice because everyone's asleep, but they're there and they're active. And they are making a point of using their power for their best interest, whether you know it or not. That's kind of scary. And by the way, don't forget the poll. There is a poll up there. Should news media be allowed to lecture elected officials? Please let me know, because I want to know how I should react when I do my next interview with Anthony Brindisi. And I'll bring it up to him what the public thinks. This is important. I'll ask him about it. He's promised to do an interview with me. I'll ask him what he thinks about that, if he agrees that news media should be allowed to lecture, because that's what we're seeing with CNN. And does he agree that the governor should be able to make deals, absolute deals, that the public can't do anything about? Kind of like when the governor bulletproofed the Utica hospital that he supported, and the public could do nothing about that, and it's going forward, and it's going to take away people's homes, it's going to kill nonprofits, it's destroying businesses. Does he think this is just another extension of that same power to go out there and do what the government wants to do, regardless of what the people want? Is he a supporter of that idea? It's a very important question. He wouldn't answer it during the campaign trail, but if he wins, I want to ask him that and see what is his answer. What should we expect? We already know what Ocasio-Cortez thinks, that as long as you have a union and have the right minimum wage amount and make sure people have socialized medicine, then she's perfectly fine with it. She's okay. She doesn't care about the abuse of power. She cares about whether or not you're properly socialist or not. God, where are we going in this nation? I'm terrified. This stuff it's just driving me nuts. How can we be doing all of this? I don't know. Yeah, that reminds me of... I also wanted to talk about Maxine Waters. And, I mean, another expression of that abuse of power. Maxine Waters wants revenge. She wants revenge. She wants to get those bad people and those bankers. She wants to do to them what they did to her. Really? Come on. Let's get serious here. She wants to get back at people for not... She basically wants revenge for not being in power since 2016. She wants to do things to the public because the public didn't put her in power. That's kind of upsetting. That any politician would publicly state that their whole goal is to get revenge against any group of people. I mean, that's like Nixon with his hit list. Our nation went insane saying, you can't have an enemies list. You can't use the power of elected office against individuals and businesses just because you're elected. And that's what Maxine Waters is doing. That is what she's promised. That's what apparently Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is more than happy to do. And that is what Governor Cuomo is more than happy to do. In their pursuit of power, they're willing to abuse that power because they have it. And no one is questioning them, except little old me, the little old No Soundbites Allowed podcast. Michael Voss, political commentator over the last decade, putting my neck out there because they need to be questioned on this. And that's what we should be upset about. Quite honestly, that's one of the biggest things we should be upset about, is how dare they think that they can just do anything that they bloody well feel just because they're elected. They don't have that right. They don't have the right. But what this is turning out to be is one big Goblin Slayer episode. You know, I'm going back onto that theme again. You know, that guy, that little bruised kid with the sword that just got knocked out of his hand, that's the sword of justice. We are the people. We're that guy fighting against the oppression of those goblins surrounding him. And our sword of justice just got smacked out of our hands. And we are watching the swarm of oppression just surround us. Yeah, that's troubling. We're watching freedoms being stripped away bit by bit. And we're okay with it because, you know, no one's noticed it. Because it hasn't raised our taxes enough yet. Because we still have the escape clause that about 1.5 million people, between 1.2 and 1.5 people in New York State have already done. Leave, get out of Dodge. They're getting out of New York. U-Haul is thanking Governor Cuomo for every one of his bad economic policies because it just increases the number of Republicans and conservatives that are getting out of the state before it gets to be too bad. And they are running out of here in droves to the benefit of Texas, to the benefit of Florida, to the benefit of just about every state except California and New York. We are seeing the mass exodus because no one wants to be here because they see what's coming. And I'm still fighting against it. And I tell you, it's tougher and tougher every day to say, why am I still here? It's not the weather. It's not that there was a cold snap and we saw snow come down and people lost their minds. No, that's not it, because that happens every year. That's always been the case. I've been in New York State for virtually my entire life, 50 years old now. And I've spent at least 27 years in New York State. And I can tell you, it's not the weather that's the problem. It's the economic policy. It's the abuse of power of the government. That's the problem. That's what's driving people out, because we never had an exodus out of the state at this pace to this degree before Governor Cuomo. That's documented. That's not even a question. It's a fact. So we should be very concerned about that. Really seriously concerned about that. That's the bigger issue. And I know a lot of politicians after the 2018 election, I've talked to several politicians, they're not staying. They're not going to stay in this state. They're planning on leaving, which is sad. Sad in that people who have fought hard on elections, they've been elected for decades or even years or months, that people who are saying that it's just not worth it anymore. The fight's done. The loss is here. It's over. Game over. To quote aliens, game over, man. I don't know. But I think we still have something worth fighting for if we realize we need to fight. If we can avoid the compulsion of speech that is being put on us, that compulsion to only think one thing because we have no other choice, that to fight off this theory, this media promoted ideal from the far left that if you don't agree, you must be evil, which is just stupid. It's just a stupid idea. Just because I don't agree with giving Governor Cuomo ultimate power in New York State to be able to make deals that usurp all levels of government does not mean I'm an evil person. Just because I want to keep my firearms, because I want to protect myself from the overreaching abuse of power of Governor Cuomo or anyone else in the government, doesn't mean I'm an evil person. The fact that I want to have my choice in what kind of products that I buy, whether that's a AK-47, an AR-15, a 1911 45 caliber handgun, whether it's having a shotgun, whether it's buying a Lexus or an Audi or a U-Haul or any kind of car or truck, doesn't matter. It's my choice. It's part of the freedom of being an American that I get to choose whatever one of these things I want to do and how I want to use them. And some people will abuse that. Always true. Some human beings will always abuse everything. They abuse drugs, they abuse people, they abuse themselves. You can't stop human nature. Human beings will do whatever they do. Although some people seem to think that, yeah, they can. Through the power of government, they can legislate and control what people do. And that should be more scary than anything else. I can live with the threat of someone abusing the freedoms that they have. I can understand that, I can quantify that, and I can adjust and deal with that. I can't deal with being compelled to have only one thought because I only have one choice. And even though I object to it, I am now guilty and I am persecuted for it. And that's what we're turning into, a nation of persecution. That people who don't agree And this is true of the left or the right. People who don't agree need to be persecuted because they're evil. That's just not real. That's not true. It's the worst kind of choice we could possibly make, I believe. And we're seeing it identified in such clear events. We're seeing immediately after an election, Governor Cuomo abusing the power that he was given because he can. Because he knows he got reelected, and the corruption that's around him, the abuse of power he's done in the past and he continues to do means nothing. And he can still go forward and go into 2020, even though he thinks America is not great by his own words. It doesn't matter. He can go out there. He doesn't need to think America is great. He just needs to be able to have power. And if he has power and he's got the news media that says he's, not the worst, most evil thing out in the world compared to his opponents, well, then that's all he needs. We should be terrified of that kind of thought. And to have news media that is more than willing to go out there and to pontificate and to lecture elected officials and anyone who would question them because it doesn't match their political agenda, we should be terrified. We should be scared. We should be worried about this. These are bad things. These are terrifying things. And my technology is messing with me again. God help me. It's just that kind of a day today. Just irritated on so many levels because technology is not, we're just watching so much go wrong right now. So many really important things that we should be concerned about. And they're either being not addressed, not paid attention to, that it's just, it's kind of scary. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I mean, today, for some reason, I'm not hearing a lot of people make comments, which is a little unusual. And it could be just because everyone's tired. It's after the election. And nobody wants to talk about politics, which is the perfect time and why we're seeing so many levels of politicians coming out and immediately telling us and trying to enact political gamesmanship and abuse of power because they know the election's done. The number of people who are paying attention to politics dropped by 75%. And so they're trying to get away with things that they could not get away with beforehand. Because at this moment, between now and January 1st, no one is paying attention to politics. No one is paying attention to what politicians are doing. They're not paying attention to what politicians are saying they're going to do. They're not looking at the policy that's going through. No. They just don't want to talk about it because politics, it's over. It's over. The election's done. All politics stop because the election happened. And it's all over now. No, it's not. Your life is still being affected by these decisions, and people are still abusing their power. And we need to watch them even more now than ever. And I know that no one's paying attention. I watch every year, year after year. Right after the election, we always watch it. It's like a cliff dive. The number of people who are paying attention to politics dives off of a cliff and drops, and no one's paying attention. And at that same time, year over year over year, we watch politicians come out and abuse their power most often and in the biggest ways immediately after election when they know nobody wants to look at it. No one's talking about it. No one's paying attention. That's why we know that so many politicians are looking to take people's firearms, that they're looking to change the laws, to eliminate the Second Amendment, to go out there and eliminate various levels of government. This is what we're seeing happen. And we should all be scared. And we should all be talking about it. We're not, but we should. We really, really should. Because this is important. And it's happening before us right now. And even though, and we know that people aren't paying attention, and we know that social media is restricting the ability for people to find out and to ask questions and to find out the answers. And that's kind of sad. Because since they know that, they know what they can get away with. And this is when we're getting abused. We are being abused, people. And it doesn't matter if you agree with me on the right or the left, whether you're a conservative or a libertarian, whether you're the far left, Citizen Action, Antifa, you're all losing. We're all losing. We are all being abused. And whether it's for this cause that someone said, or because someone has this ideal, or because they think they're going to be right about this thing or that thing, that doesn't change the fact that we're being abused, that our system is being corrupted, that it's falling apart around us. And we need to be aware of it. We need to see this. We need to act on this. We need to use our power. Our power and our voices did not end with the election. We did not lose the ability to control what's going to happen at every level of our political system just because an election stopped, because people got elected and some people lost races. It didn't stop. We still have the ability to make things happen. We still are the ultimate power and control of this government, not the elected officials. I don't care if they're a Republican or Democrat. I don't care who they are. They are not the power of this government. We are. And when they're abusing their power, as we are seeing level after level, whether it's through the media or whether it's through elected office, when we're watching them abuse this nation and abuse us, well, we have to be able to do something. And we can, because we are the power. The question is, will we? Do we have the will to do this? I don't know. I do have the will to continue to keep having this conversation. I do have the will to make sure that I'm going to be out here and fight the algorithms and the suppression by social media, to continue to go out there and ask the tough questions of elected officials, to fight against bad legislation and the abuse of power that we see out there, because it isn't about an election. It's not about who won and who lost, as much as it's about we are the people. It is our voice. It is our votes. It is our approval. It is what we allow the government to do. We should never forget, and I know that most people don't realize, not in nowadays, especially those who are younger. Let's remember, the Constitution is meant as a limit on the power of the government, not the people. We have all the power. The government only has the power we give it. And there's only so much people can do. The government can do. There's only so much the government can do. We control everything. They don't get to tell us what they're going to do. They get to ask us, can they do it? And either through our action or inaction, that either does or doesn't happen. And I tell you what, right now there's inaction on the side of the people. But in the government, we're seeing lots of action. And some of it is even approved by the news media in abuse of their power, again, to the disadvantage of the public. These are my thoughts. You may agree with them, you may not. I'm always open to your comments. I will be looking forward to seeing everyone comment on this. When you see it on Facebook, or if you see it on Twitter, or you see it on YouTube, let me know your thoughts. Tell me what you think. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm right. Come out on Monday to the Vestal Public Library when I do the postmortem on the 2018 election. I'll be talking about that. Keep an eye out for the Liberty First Foundation. I'll be doing a podcast for them talking about the impact of what we just found out about the Second Amendment from California and how that's going to be affecting everyone's lives. Excuse me. And also, we'll be having a conversation very shortly with the SUNY Broom Republican podcast, and I invite you to come out and see that as well. Until then, everyone be well. Bye-bye.